Tonight on Primetime, tensions are mounting between the United States and Iran as diplomacy, unrest and military maneuvers converge. President Donald Trump says Tehran has been in contact about a possible agreement, but with protests inside Iran still spreading. What is Washington's next move? Deterrence, not war, for now. Good evening. President Donald Trump says Iran is looking to strike a deal with Washington, even as the United States deploys additional military assets to the region, including an aircraft carrier strike group, a move underscoring the growing stakes on both sides.
In an interview with Axios, US President Donald Trump said Tehran has called several times and wants to negotiate a new agreement with the United States. He described the standoff with Iran as a wave, while warning that a large armada is moving into the region. The comments come as the US steps up its military posture. US Central Command confirmed that the USS Abraham Lincoln Aircraft Carrier Strike Group has been deployed to the Middle East, saying the move is intended to ensure regional security and stability. Iranian officials, meanwhile, accuse the United States and Israel of backing armed insurgents and have warned they would respond swiftly and comprehensively to any attack. Inside Iran, the situation continues to deteriorate. Nationwide protests that erupted on December 28th over economic hardship and the collapsing rail have spread across the country. The UN Special Rapporteur on Iran, Mai Sato, says she has received alarming reports of injured protesters being removed from hospitals and detained, a practice she says violates international law by denying access to medical care.
I'm hearing is around 5,000 to 7,000 US dollars to get their family members' bodies back. And just to put this in context, this is a huge financial burden for families already living in economic hardship. And what I would add to this is that families, when they go to the morgues, to hospitals to collect their loved ones' remains, they've also been forced to sign documents stating that their family member was actually part of the security force, the member of the Basij, allegedly killed by protesters. And I think if this is true, this practice really compounds grief with extortions.
Human rights groups say the protests are the deadliest since Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution. According to the US-based group Rana, nearly 6,000 people have been killed. Official figures, however, put the death toll at 3,117. As unrest deepens inside Iran and US military forces move closer to its borders, concerns are mounting over stability within the country and across the wider Middle East.
Joining us now is Turkan Bozkurt, a human rights activist and deputy director of IPEC Research Centre in Montreal, Canada. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. This standoff between the US and Iran, very difficult game of chess, isn't it? How do you assess the balance between pressure and engagement in the current approach we're seeing from Washington?
Hello, and thank you for the invite. It is not clear that Washington has reached a definitive decision on whether to escalate military against Iran. However, what does appear evident is a posture of contingency planning. So the United States is taking steps to ensure that it has credible options available if the White House decides to act against Iran. Recent force movements, as of Monday, the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, accompanied by 3 other warships equipped with, Tomahawk missiles, have entered the Central Command's area of responsibility in the Western Indian Ocean. So based on this, the USS Abraham Lincoln is like a small American city or a base at sea. It has over 5,600 crew on board. It has advanced aircrafts like the Super Hornets, Gowler, which is specifically used for electronic and radar jamming, as well as stealth fighters. So this is an effort to, I think, enhance readiness and deterrence, as well as flexibility. If the White House were to order attacks on Iran, this could be carried out in theory within a day or two. However, I think there are really crucial elements here to remember, such as that this posture also reflects a recognition that Iran retains substantial retaliatory capability. So despite past attacks against their missile systems and command and control, Iran has a lot of missiles left and drones that can strike U.S. bases in the region. So this is also an element of defense for the United States.
And what can we learn, Turkan, from the timing of what's happened? There was a very rapid initial move towards waters near to Iran, then a sort of slower, more methodical build-up while, I guess, negotiations have taken place. What is it about the timing that gives us a clue to the strategic priorities in Washington?
That's really interesting what has been happening between Washington and Tehran. I think this is an indication that Donald Trump is really serious about reaching some sort of agreement with Iran. And while a military attack seems to be on the table, I don't believe that it is likely for Donald Trump to start a war with Iran. At the same time, as you mentioned, U.S. messaging has left a lot of room for diplomacy and meetings and engagement to perhaps get or reach an agreement on the table. But given that Trump was elected as a peace president and one of his priorities was to end the forever wars in the Middle East and bring back all of the American soldiers as he promised in his campaign. So I don't think it is likely for him to carry out this attack. But at the same time, Iran is not Venezuela. It is neither in proximity nor in power. An attack on nuclear facilities is different than an attack on Tehran that would start an all-out war. And I don't think that Donald Trump wants this. Iran may not be capable of winning a war against the US and therefore Israel, but they're definitely capable of prolonging the war and conducting attacks against the US bases. So I think Washington wants a more US-friendly government in Iran, not a fragmented Iran that might lead to a civil war and a fertile land for proxy wars. So the US military's bases, especially in the past decade in the Middle East, 50,000 soldiers, and I don't think he'd be willing to put their lives at risk, especially since countries like UAE are coming forward and saying that we will not allow US to use our airspace, territory, or waters to conduct any hostile military actions against Iran.
Now, whilst this is going on, the protests continue, the unrest hasn't gone away. What's your assessment at the moment of the type of pressure that the Tehran leadership is under?
Yeah, so Tehran is managing both external and internal pressure right now. We talked a little bit about the external pressure, but in terms of the internal pressure, the protests have very much slowed down, even though they haven't completely stopped. And based on the estimates, we see that anywhere from 5,000 to 30,000 people are dead. But due to the internet and communication blockage, much of the information is still unclear, and human rights organizations are unable to give exact numbers. But as you mentioned, the oppressiveness of the regime hasn't stopped, just as the protests in some regions haven't stopped, even though they're very small. So, for instance, in the South Azerbaijani cities of Zanjan and Sayangala, at least 30 people have been detained just in the past couple of days. And these can be read as population control to ensure that if there is an attack from the US, that they're not also facing another wave of protests inside the country. We've also seen clear responses and messages from Tehran that if US were to carry an attack, that this would mean an all-out war. So Reza Talinik, the defense ministry spokesman, said that our risk is more decisive and painful than before. We've also seen a mural that was unveiled in Tehran that read, if you sow the wind, you will reap the whirlwind. And while many outlets have read this as a message to the US, but I don't think this is only a message to the US. I think this is also a message to Iranian people themselves that if you were to start another wave of demonstrations, you will reap the oppression, you will reap the suppression that comes with it. We've also seen Iran's proxies have begun to openly threaten the Western countries, specifically Washington. So in Lebanon, the Hezbollah's leader, Naim Qasem, as well as the Kurdish militia, the Shiite militias in Iraq have also opened verbal fire. So the axis of resistance may be weak, but it is still there, and it seems that the Iranian government is preparing.
Now, Turkan, there's been a huge debate between analysts, experts on the precise causation of the uprising, the protests. When you look at factors like economic collapse versus pure political mobilization, what does your research tell you as to the configuration of the cause of these protests?
Like you mentioned, there are some contradictory information that is coming from the inside of Iran. So the available signals suggest that protests are less product of a centrally coordinated or like a highly organized mobilization, and it's more reactive wave that's been triggered by and demands of the Iranian people. I agree with this.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's very interesting. Does that mean that, in a sense, it's more authentic? It's a more accurate read of what the people really want?
Yeah, I'd say I agree with that. So one of the contradictions was that the protest started from the Tehran Bazaar by these middle to higher class merchants who were, really tired of the fall of the rial compared to the dollar, as their main import-export their business is done on the dollar. But even if there are some questions regarding the Bazaar's involvement, and especially given that they don't usually interfere with the domestic protests in Iran. But when we keep in mind how it started spreading, I don't think that it's highly organized mobilization. I think it's completely reactive, and it's just people being tired due to the economic strain and political grievances, especially when we think about how in the first week of the protests, regions such as the Azerbaijani regions in the northwest, the Kurdish regions and Baluchi regions stayed out of the protests just to assess the situation and understand what's going on, and they only joined the protests later. I do think that this can be read as organic.
Now, Turkan, finally, I'd just like to ask you, there are many, many people, of course, around the world who are concerned about the situation, whether you have a direct impact, people, your loved ones who are suffering, or whether it's just a slightly more abstract perspective. Perhaps you're booking a flight and you're worried about whether or not you'll be able to go and get back. All of those millions of people out there who are concerned, what is your current assessment of the risk of miscalculation and therefore something escalating?
Yeah, it's been really tough for, especially to think about the Iranians who have lost their loved ones. But not only for the Iranians, as you mentioned, we see that this is impacting the neighboring countries as well as just Western countries in general. We know that Air France and KLM have been canceling flights from Dubai or the Middle East in general. So this is impacting everyone. And I think that's one of the factors why Donald Trump is really assessing whether a military action is necessary, because I don't think that the United States or the neighboring countries, for that matter, such as Turkey or the Republic of Azerbaijan, or bigger forces in the region like China and Russia, want another collapse of a regime that may end with a prolonged civil war or a prolonged fragmentation, because the United States is very far. This is not the case of Venezuela. And even when we think of other cases such as Iraq or Afghanistan, where United States tried to intervene and some aspects of it were not successful. So I don't think the United States wants to repeat a similar scenario in Iran, given that Iran is a much bigger, badder villain than what we've seen in, with Assad or other similar forces in the region. So the United States and the Western countries have a lot to think about how this will impact not just the Iranians inside Iran, but as well as the neighboring countries and even Americans on their soil.
Turkan, we thank you very much. We appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we'll be discussing this rise in tension across the region with Frontline host Anastasia Lavrina. Do stay with us.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب أهلية.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to Primetime. Joining us now is the host of Inside Politics and Frontline's Anastasia Lavrina, who's been tracking how rising tensions around Iran are being viewed across the region, particularly by neighbouring states watching the military build-up closely. Anastasia, always a pleasure to have you with us in the studio. The current US military build-up then, we've just been discussing it. How is this being interpreted across the South Caucasus?
Well, indeed, that's a topic number one. I would say everybody's talking about the implications, the possible confrontation between Iran and the United States may have for the region of the South Caucasus, because the region itself plays a significant role and has a very important role for many countries in the region and far beyond. Just recently in Davos, during the meeting between the President Ilham Aliyev and President Donald Trump, the importance of stability in the region was also combined and discussed once again. Therefore, definitely the implications will be visible. But I will say that there is more information about the possible outcomes. There is a way that experts are trying to determine on how it will have the consequences for the region itself, but it still raises fears of regional spillover and instability. Energy transit concerns, the middle corridor, then the interest of China. I will say that there is more, definitely I'm talking from my own perspectives now, not from the official point of view. Therefore, for my mind, there is a more, let's say, concern about the game the global powers may play in the region of the South Caucasus to promote their own interests, and that will have more implications rather than the direct confrontation in between of the United States and Iran. As for now, we do not see this confrontation on the ground, and already many countries express their willingness not to serve as a platform, not to be used as a platform. Let's say Azerbaijan itself many times, most of the time I will say even, mentioned that it will not allow its territory to be used against not only Iran but any country in the region as well. United Arab Emirates mentioned the same. Turkey also expressed concern because there is a real willingness to see the diplomatic solutions of all of these ways. And I will say, for my point of view, indeed, Donald Trump is trying to find a way out of this situation, trying to put some pressure on Iran and come up with a solution which will benefit, first of all, of course, United States. And in my mind, Iran is also not willing to have any kind of, let's say, significant implications for its own population, despite all of those processes which is taking place at the moment, but also for the countries in the region, if it happens, because the implications from the economic energy perspectives and the political spillover will be indeed very visible.
Well, let's just talk about that now. One of the things we can see from this map behind us is not just the scale of the activity, the pressure that's taking place, but also the complexity of it, the potential multitude of different sequences that could occur. With this in mind, how is regional security, which extends South Caucasus, Central Asia, how are actors like Azerbaijan and others making calculations to assess how this changes the security of the region?
To my mind, Azerbaijan will continue following the strategy it's already chosen for its own security. It's first and most of all, it's a priority to I will say support and promote its own security guarantees. Mostly relying on the bilateral relations with Armenia, with Turkey, with Iran, let's say, because Baku's official orientation remains on sovereign control of security, economic development, and regional cooperation, not to be a part of the plan of any global power or any other countries who is willing to use Azerbaijan or its territory in its own interests. So, first of all, Azerbaijan will control the security by its own and will continue building the relations on the bilateral base, together with Iran, continuing its economic partnership, cooperation, the border control, and etc., but also together with the United States. We do see how the bilateral relations between Washington and Baku is being developed within the last months. So I'm more than sure Baku and Washington, those countries are willing to continue the ways of cooperation. And I guess in Washington, there is also the clear understanding in case of spillover effect will touch Azerbaijan, Armenia, or any other country, it will definitely affect the interest, the economic interest of the United States, including the how they call it, Trump corridor or Zangezur corridor. But from the latest meeting, we could understand that America is willing to invest money to have some more control from the economic perspectives. It also comes to the energy. In the United States of America, there is a clear understanding if something happens in the region, then Europe will have to find new partners. If not Russia, if not Azerbaijan, not Central Asia, then what else can be supplied from these perspectives? And we cannot ignore the fact that the United States is willing to continue cooperation with the Central Asian states in the format of C5+1 or C6 together with Azerbaijan +1. Another very important moment here is that China and Iran are close partners, and there were also some information that China will be able to support from the military perspectives Iran in case of any kind of escalation. Therefore, you can imagine if United States is starting any kind of conflict in the region, or China also intervene, that will be very catastrophic. And from my own understanding of the situation, Donald Trump is not willing to spend so much time and resources to take that. From the example of Venezuela, we can understand that he prefers to act quick to solve all the issues on the ground. In the case of escalation with Iran, it will have a long-term implications in the Middle East, in the South Caucasus, in Central Asia, in Europe, and so on. All the projects more or less will be touched by this, let's say, escalation. Then all of those transport routes which pass through Iran to the Middle East and to other countries will be also affected. And we cannot ignore the fact that still Iran is openly saying that in case of any confrontation and involvement of Israel, it will respond in accordance with that.
Let's talk about the other actors then, because it's a good point that you make. I mean, Baku clearly has a comprehensive, a clear position on what's going on. What about other countries in the region?
One of the strongest partner in this Azerbaijani partner, I guess, the Brazilian country is Turkey, and Turkey has already made several statements trying to de-escalate the situation and trying to bring the sides at the table of negotiations, because Turkey, being a member of NATO alliance, at the same time having its own partnership and cooperation with the United States, with Iran and Azerbaijan, is not interested to see any kind of escalation in the region. So Turkey repeatedly called for negotiation and de-escalation. Then I will say, as I already mentioned, United Arab Emirates stated that they will not allow to use its territory against Iran. They officially declare it. Then Israel officials also said, of course, they do consider Iran as a key security threat, but in my, let's say, brief conversation with one Israeli expert within my own show, the expert stated that as for now, they are sure Iran is weakened enough by the protests inside the country that are not able to support any, let's say, military group outside in other countries, as is what mentioned by Hamas, for example. So in Israel, it's being understood that Iran is more now concerned about the domestic issues and the relations with the United States of America. So from this point of view, if there is not any escalation, I will say we shouldn't be threatened by any possible confrontation in between of Iran and Israel in near future. But in case of any kind of intervenence, it will definitely affect the region of the Middle East as well. Just remember, during the latest escalation between Israel and Iran, threatened to close the Hormuz. So it will definitely affect the energy market. It will definitely affect the trade. And from that point of view, it will not be only the confrontation in between of Iran and the United States. It will definitely bring to the negotiation table or any types of confrontation in between the members of the European Union, who already expressed a concern first in regards to what's happening in Iran, I mean the domestic issues and the protests and the thousands who were killed there, and also concern over the escalation in between of Tehran and Washington.
Yeah, you mentioned Europe there, and of course everybody wants stability. Nobody wants continued instability, as you rightly say, not just for humanitarian reasons, for political reasons, but crucially for energy flow, for trade, economically, there's a real need, a real fervour, isn't there, for actors to really try and get this situation stabilised?
Yes, for sure. The connection in between of Central Asia, the Caspian region, the South Caucasus, North and South projects. There is not only the West and East, the connections which we have, but also the projects which connects North and South. And even if Russia is so much concerned over the situation around Ukraine, I wouldn't agree with the statements that Russia will, let's say, stay neutral in case of any kind of American intervention. Therefore, because it has its own economic and energy interest in the region as well. Then Iran, as I already mentioned, it's a good partner of China. They do have a strategic cooperation lasted for many years, and there are also some projects for near future. So in case of escalation, it will definitely affect it as well. Then regional diversification will be challenged here, meaning that the countries which already rely on some transport and energy flows will have to find the other partners, at least for the period when there is the situation stabilized between the Washington and Tehran. And migration, we shouldn't ignore this fact, because even now there's thousands killed in Iran, and it's already created some concern about the future if people would love to stay there, or they will find a way to cross the border to go to Azerbaijan or to any other country. So migration will be and have to be controlled. And I read a very interesting article stating that in case of escalation, Afghanistan will suffer, as there are still some projects which is passing through the projects which is passing through Iran and then reach the Afghanistan. In case of any kind of escalation, it affects Afghanistan and the country which is still suffering from the long-term war, the consequences, unstable, I will say, economic situation there. So any kind of economic instability will lead to political consequences.
It's a good point, and you're talking there about those countries that border Iran. Of course, you can't escape the fact that we're sat within one of those countries right here. Yeah. What is the risk, as you see it, Anastasia, of this instability causing spillover into those bordering countries?
Bordering of Iran, bordering of the South Caucasus, it will have the spillover effect, as if now the Saudi Arabia is staying more or less neutral. But in case we do know about the close relations between the Saudi Arabia and the United States of America, so it's quite difficult to predict how exactly this country will behave. The situation in the region, I would say, in the South Caucasus, I am not that much worried about. As I already stated, the countries in the region rely on themselves, on their own security. We do not have, let's say, the close ties with the NATO alliance or the willingness to participate in the war of the third countries. So I'm more than sure that the countries in the region will try to have more stable relations in between. At least Azerbaijan and Armenia are willing to continue the negotiations over the peace agreement to be signed, we hope, in near future, and the development of the projects which will help to remove the barriers which we have now as long-term conflict consequences. Then the transport and energy corridors which we have at the moment, we are more worried about their security, and therefore we will try to do our best to unite the efforts. So I'm sure that Azerbaijan or Armenia or Georgia will not intervene in the possible confrontation, but the consequences, the political, economic, and energy, they will definitely affect everybody in the region, everyone. I mean, all the countries which is here. As I said in the beginning, it's very important not to become a part of the global game, which allows global powers to promote their own interests, but try to concentrate on the security and benefits of its own population, what we have here in Azerbaijan.
Very interesting indeed. Anastasia, here at PrimeTime, we're huge fans of both Frontlines and Inside Politics, and we thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks.
Okay, after the break, Andy Mioch will be here taking us through the very top stories that are making the headlines in the world of business. Do stay with us. and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port Aiyu.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time now. Andy Mioch is with us with the very latest business news stories. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, Brussels and New Delhi have finalized a major trade deal. There's some tariff uncertainty between the US and South Korea. Another investigation was launched into the chatbot Grok. And there's also some news from the aviation, cars and sportswear industries. So let's begin. First up, India and the European Union have finalized a landmark trade deal expected to double EU exports to India in the next 6 years. The agreement brings a substantial tariff reduction on a wide range of goods as both sides seek to hedge against unpredictable ties with the United States.
India and the European Union have finalised a landmark trade deal. The move seeks to hedge against unpredictable ties with the US and is expected to double EU exports to India by 2032. The The EU said it will eliminate or reduce tariffs on 96.6% of traded goods by value and will lead to savings of $4.75 billion in duties. In return, the EU will cut tariffs on 99.5% goods traded over 7 years, with tariffs to be cut to zero on Indian marine goods, leather and textile products, as well as chemicals, rubber, base metals, and gems and jewellery. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said the deal is the largest ever free trade agreement in India's history. According to an EU statement, New Delhi will slash tariffs on cars to 10% over 5 years, from as high as 110%. That will benefit European automakers such as Volkswagen, Renault, Mercedes-Benz and BMW. Officials said they expect the deal to be implemented within a year. The agreement comes days after the EU signed a pivotal pact with the South American bloc Mercosur and follows deals last year with Indonesia, Mexico and Switzerland. The rush of deals underscores global efforts to hedge against trade with the US. President Donald Trump's bid to take over Greenland and tariff threats on European nations has tested long-standing alliances among Western nations.
This is really nice.
Still with global trade, South Korea is trying to assure the US of its commitment to a trade deal struck last year, following President Donald Trump's threat to hike tariffs on imports, citing delays in the parliamentary ratification process.
South Korea scrambled on Tuesday to assure the US it remained committed to implementing a trade deal after President Donald Trump said he would hike tariffs on autos and other imports from its ally, blaming a delay in enacting the pact agreed last year. At a meeting focused on the issue, ruling Democratic Party lawmaker Kim Young-jin said the National Assembly was handling the measures through normal and proper procedures. The Democratic Party said 5 bills that would enact the US investment are now pending committee review and urged the opposition to speed up the process. Speaking to reporters, a spokesperson from the People Power Party signalled it was open to moving forward, but argued that formal parliamentary ratification may be needed. Trump said on Monday that South Korea's parliament was not living up to its side of the deal by swiftly enacting the agreement he reached with President Lee Jae-myung to make huge investments in US business projects in return for tariff cuts. It was not immediately clear when the hike would take effect. The deal between the allies was announced last year and includes a $350 billion South Korean investment into the US. Exports from the Asian nation hit a record high of just over $709 billion in 2025, up 3.8% from 2024. But US-bound shipments fell 3.8%, though the country was still Seoul's second biggest market after China. South Korea's National Assembly usually approves bills only when regular sessions or extraordinary sessions are scheduled. The next bill review sessions are due to start on February 3rd.
The European Commission has launched an investigation into Elon Musk's X platform and AI tool Grok. The Brussels probe was opened over Grok's potential role in generating sexualized deepfakes and follows a similar move by the UK regulator.
The European Commission has launched an investigation into Elon Musk's X over concerns its AI tool Grok was used to create sexualized images of real people. It follows a similar announcement in January from the UK watchdog Ofcom. If the site is found to have breached the rules of EU's under the Digital Services Act, the Commission could fine the company up to 6% of its global annual turnover. A previous statement from X's safety account said the social media platform had stopped Grok from digitally altering pictures of people to remove their clothing in jurisdictions where such content is illegal. The EU regulator said it may impose interim measures if X refuses to implement meaningful adjustments. It said it had also extended its ongoing investigation launched in December 2023 over risks associated with X's recommender systems, the algorithm that recommends specific posts to users. Other investigations into the platform's chatbot are underway in Australia, France and Germany. Grok was temporarily banned in Indonesia and Malaysia, although the latter has now lifted the ban.
In aviation news, Ryanair reported a sharp drop in profits in the third quarter of its financial year, which ended in December. The Irish airline's accounts were particularly squeezed by a fine imposed by Italy's antitrust authority.
Irish no-frills airline Ryanair on Monday announced an 80% drop in net profit for its third quarter, impacted by a hefty fine from Italy's competition authority. Profit after tax stood at €30 million in the 3 months to the end of December, compared with €149 million in the period a year earlier, the Dublin-based carrier said. The decline was driven by a provision for a fine totaling more than €255 million imposed by the Italian regulator, which said Ryanair abused its dominant position to block travel agencies' access to its services. Ryanair confirmed Monday that it had appealed the fine, calling it baseless. Revenue in the quarter rose 9% to €3.2 billion. Chief Executive Michael O'Leary said full-year net profit could reach as much as €2.2 billion. He added that he expected full-year traffic to reach almost 208 million passengers, an annual gain of 4%.
And finally, on the auto industry, fully electric car sales in the EU surpassed petrol vehicles for the first time in December. Data from the European Auto Lobby indicates shifting consumer preferences despite new proposals to relax emissions regulations.
Fully electric car sales in December overtook petrol for the first time in the European Union. That was despite policymakers proposing to loosen emissions regulations. Tesla continued to lose market share, though, particularly to competitors including China's BYD and Europe's best-selling group Volkswagen. That was according to data from the European auto lobby ACEA. Car sales throughout Europe sustained a 6th straight month of year-on-year growth. Overall registrations, a proxy for sales, hit their highest volumes in 5 years in 2025. Europe's car industry faces challenges including competition from China, US, import tariffs and difficulties in meeting domestic regulations for EV adoption. The EU unveiled in December a plan to abandon an effective 2035 ban on combustion engine cars, bowing to calls from struggling car makers. But analysts expect EVs to gain in popularity despite the policy relaxation. Sales in the EU, Britain and the European Free Trade Association rose by 7.6% to 1.2 million cars in December. They were up over 10% at Volkswagen and 4.5% at Stellantis. They fell 2.2% at Renault, though, and registrations at Tesla were down over a fifth. Competitor BYD saw a 229% rise.
One more piece of news from the world of sportswear. China's Anta Sports announced it will buy a 29% stake in Puma for €1.5 billion, positioning itself as the company's largest shareholder and aiming to expand its global presence.
China's biggest sportswear brand, Anta Sports Products, said on Tuesday it would buy a 29.06% stake in Puma from the Pinault family for €1.5 billion, making it the biggest shareholder in the German sportswear maker. The deal is expected to help Puma increase its sales in the lucrative Chinese market and help Anta in its quest to become a more globalized business. The $27.8 billion Hong Kong-listed sportswear company will pay €35 per share in cash to Pinault family holding company Artemis, which also controls Paris-listed luxury conglomerate Kering. The deal will help Artemis reduce its high debt load, and Kering shares rose 1% on the news. Puma shares surged 17% initially, but pulled back to trade up 3%, still near their lowest levels in a decade. The offer represents a 62% premium to Puma's closing share price of €21.6 on Monday, and comes as the German firm seeks to revive its fortunes after it lost ground to Nike and Adidas. It also faces competition from fast-growing brands like New Balance and Hoka.
And that is a wrap on the Business Daily for tonight. Quite a big deal, that trade deal India and EU struck, Guy, don't you think?
Yes, indeed, Andy. And thank you very much for a great selection there. We're going to be taking a look at this story in much more detail after the break, looking at how India and the European Union have moved closer after sealing this long-awaited trade deal. So do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. I'm here. Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we're reporting on the shape of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port News.
Welcome back to Primetime. India and the European Union have sealed what both sides describe as their most ambitious trade agreement to date, alongside a new defence partnership. Now, the move reflects a shared effort to reduce dependence on the US and China. Our correspondent Aishan Garg reports now from New Delhi.
The India-EU Trade Pact took nearly 2 decades to come through. It creates a free trade zone spanning 2 billion people and a quarter of the globe's GDP. Under the agreement, tariffs on over 90% of EU goods exports to India will be eliminated or reduced, saving European companies up to 4 billion euros annually, according to the European Commission. That means lower duties on everything from aircraft, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and also European wine. There's also good news for the EU's automotive market too, with car duties set to fall from 110 to 10% eventually into what's one of the world's fastest growing car markets. But officials here in New Delhi say they are restricting entry of some goods to safeguard vulnerable sectors such as dairy and some agricultural produce. For Indian exporters, the deal opens Europe's vast market to textiles, gems and jewelry and leather products, many of whom officials say will now enjoy zero tariffs as opposed to about 10% earlier, helping exports worth $33 billion heading into Europe. Officials say 99% of Indian products by market value will now have access to the European markets. The agreement will also now be scrutinized by lawyers and needs to be ratified by the European Parliament, and it is now expected to be fully in force by early next year. It is expected to double bilateral trade from roughly $136 billion to $250 billion in the next 5 years. But this isn't just about commerce. India and the EU also signed a security and defense partnership, only the third such agreement the EU bloc has made in Asia after Japan and South Korea. The framework covers maritime security, cyber defense, counter-terrorism, and critically allows India to participate in select European defense projects under the EU's PESCO initiative. This comes as Europe has been racing to reduce its security dependence on Washington as the Trump administration softens its focus on the Indo-Pacific and threatens allies with tariffs. India, meanwhile, is also working to diversify away from Russian military hardware, which still accounts for the bulk of its arsenal. And both are looking to counter China's economic and strategic reach, with officials here saying that India-EU partnership can lower their dependence on other countries. Ishan Garg for A News in New Delhi.
Well, joining me now is Gonzalo Arteles, a political commentator and communications consultant who is in Lisbon, Portugal. Mr. Teles, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Just give us your sense of the background, the context to this deal then. Is this more about just raw economics, or is it also about reducing European strategic dependence?
Yes, good afternoon here. I imagine it's nighttime there, and thanks for the invite. I think it's definitely a bit of both. I mean, at a time where the Trump administration is clearly being more and more protectionist, this comes as a breakthrough for Europe and for the European Union to diversify. For India also, in a time where it has its tariffs with the United States at 50%, it's probably the country that has them highest, or one of the countries that have them highest, due to a bad relations between this American administration and the Indian president. So there's definitely an economic bond to it, where I think there's lots of a win-win both for the EU and for India, but there's also definitely a political side to this, and that has to do with what I said, with the current situation of the American administration, and that will definitely not look at this upon a good light, and neither will probably China, because it sees that the European Union is able to diversify its partners, and in a very large scale.
Now, to get any deal of this sort of scale over the line, one would imagine that both sides need to kind of back down a little bit, particularly one that's been in a sort of state of stalemate for many years. What's your understanding of concessions that the EU needed to make to get this deal done?
Well, it's too early to say, but I think that the main concessions primarily have to do with Russia and the relation between India and Russia, with India buying lots of oil from Russia. Obviously, it's not the only EU partner that does this with the Putin administration, but I think that the EU kind of dropped that sense of the ties between India and Russia. But in a certain sense, it has to be this pragmatic, because I mean, in a world that is completely changing in an international context and changed abruptly in the last year, this had to be done in that sense. So there's also concessions from India. I mean, because India kind of looked as the EU as a too regulatory in a certain sense, and that hasn't come down from what we read from this deal. That definitely doesn't come down. So I think there are going to be ties here that both blocs are going to try to strengthen between each other. The EU might try to make India more human rights evolved in a certain sense, more democratic in certain processes. And India will probably use well its gaining approach that it has with this deal as a main partner, because now it was already a main trading partner, obviously, but now there's kind of two blocks that are going in the same path.
Yeah, what do you think this does to brand EU, Gonzalo? Do you think this improves the perception of the bloc, improves bargaining power globally, or do you think on the other side it perhaps exposes one or two internal divisions among the member states?
Again, it's too early to call. I mean, the council president of the EU, Antonio Costa, which is Portuguese, and also von der Leyen, they wouldn't agree to this deal, and they wouldn't finally conclude this deal after years of negotiations without a clear sign of a large majority of the member states wanting this to go forward. So especially Antonio Costa, because as the council president, he kind of represents the member states. So that would never happen without this agreement. But one thing that might happen is we're naturally seeing a rise of nationalist and populist political parties in the EU. And I would say that those parties won't look at this in a good sense, because everything that means globalization, that means a kind of Trumpian, that is kind of a side of this Trump view of the EU as less Christian and too global. They'll see it in a bad aspect. So I can expect that there can be a bit of a bad sense of this deal, both from Hungary, from a country like Italy, eventually. But I would say that most member states, that the ones that maintain liberal, both with center-left and center-right political parties dominating or in power, will look at it in a very good perspective.
And it's very interesting point you make there, because obviously there has been huge pressure from more right-leaning governments within the EU. We've now seen, obviously, there's a need to do business, to find ways to do more business with India, which is obviously a much more deregulated environment. Do you think to some degree those pressures have caused the EU to think again, to perhaps not push their core product of common rules, of regulation, quite so aggressively as perhaps they've done in the past?
Yes, definitely. I think it's a great question that you make, and obviously I think that the EU can't be as strict as how it looks upon the world in a certain sense, and regulation is definitely a key aspect in there. I mean, when you see a world in many geographies, like in Asia, without any regulations or very fast-paced, and the EU is kind of left behind because of its regulations and all that leave it slow, that leave it moving slower in a business-related aspect. Then obviously it has to let that down. But also, there's also something very important. I mean, when we listen to the leader of Canada make that great speech in Davos, and he could have been an EU leader speaking, and he kind of showed the path, and he said that the world order has changed, that the rules are different now, that it's not a question of us leaving our principles or putting down our principles at all, but it's understanding the new United States that we have in front of us, and kind of relating with partners in each geography and in each region in different aspects. I mean, we can expect and we should expect different things from different partners, but that's a whole new approach that the EU also has to understand. Diversify. That's the answer. And that's why this comes in such a good light, even after the Mercosur agreement by the EU, which was also huge for the continent. So, I mean, it truly is a win-win agreement, at least on the paper it is, and I think that will be in reality, because when you look at the numbers of the trade partnership going on between the EU and India, it's already huge. So this will only make it even huger and faster.
Yeah, it's a very good point you make. The Carney speech, to some degree, painted an alternative route through this difficult situation. Nevertheless, political resistance is still there. It's still a difficult tightrope for Brussels to walk. How vulnerable do you think this deal could be to potentially unraveling, stumbling in some sense?
Again, I don't think it's that vulnerable to have come to an actual deal. I mean, it was a negotiation that lasted for a long, long time. Not as long as Mercosur, which was decades, but still for years. And it kind of stalled in 2022, and now it was picked up recently. So I think it won't be vulnerable, because I don't think this step would have been taken without an agreement, again, of major member states of the EU. And we have to go back to the New World Order. I mean, when the United States is completely going after a certain sense of let's pause globalization, which is just completely obnoxious and stupid, and you know that you couldn't pause globalization, that you couldn't pause trade, because we were in it too deep. So I mean, the EU is finally understanding this, and that's what makes it unvulnerable, if you want. It's understanding that this is the future, that this is what the EU has to do in the future, because not only does it bring better economic results and ties for the continent, but it also brings a completely different political view from all geographies in the world.
Well, very good to speak to you, Mr. Tellers. We appreciate your analysis and for joining us from Lisbon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at Venezuela's proposed oil law changes and whether promised investment growth can really materialize. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. M. Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، يوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back to Primetime. Now, Venezuela's National Assembly is moving to approve changes to the country's oil law, as interim President Delcy Rodriguez says investment in oil projects is expected to rise from nearly $900 million last year to around $1.4 billion in 2026 under production sharing contracts.
Venezuela's National Assembly is fast-tracking changes to the country's oil law aimed at opening the sector to more private and foreign investment. The reforms are being pushed by acting President Delcy Rodriguez, who says the move is needed to attract capital and raise production. Speaking in Caracas, Rodriguez said investment under production sharing contracts is expected to rise sharply this year.
We currently have 29 production participation contracts signed. Last year, investment was almost $900 million, and this year, it is projected to reach $1.4 billion.
Rodriguez rejected criticism from US officials, but said Venezuela remains open to relations with Washington based on mutual respect. The proposed reform would weaken the long-standing monopoly of state oil company PDVSA, giving partners more control over operations and oil sales. US officials say sanctions could be eased if political conditions are met, though industry executives say deeper reforms would still be needed.
Well, joining me now to discuss this is Kostas Europoulos, a Director of Energy and Climate at the Eni Global Media in Athens, Greece. Thank you very much for joining us. Venezuela claims that this investment could rise sharply under new production sharing contracts. I know that you have made the case for the market impact being limited. Just talk us through that rationale.
Well, if you notice, the oil prices have not really been affected during the turmoil. When especially when the market was kind of reacting to it, and also when the announcements were made for investments, even from the Trump administration, and now from the Venezuelan government, we haven't seen a big change, and that is because, first of all, even though Venezuela has the highest oil reserves in the world, it would take more than investment to actually be able to get it off the ground, and also for that oil to reach the market. And it's also heavy oil, so in this case, it's not one of the it has to be refined in special refineries, and also even though there has been a change in Venezuela after Maduro was captured, still it's not a radical change in government. So I think that the oil. Maybe there is the willingness there, it appears, from the government and from the recent announcements, but it seems that the oil companies are very skeptical.
Yeah, it's very interesting. No radical change in government. No radical change really in that underlying infrastructure either. I think one of the points that you've made recently is that the real constraint here is not necessarily interest, appetite, but it's more about whether the system itself potentially can adapt. Just talk us through some of those key structural barriers that potentially are holding Venezuela back.
Well, first of all, also to mention, Chevron has been very active there before, even before during the Maduro government. But other major companies have been burned. And we've seen, like recently when Trump gathered the ExxonMobil CEO and also some European companies, they've expressed that skepticism. The underlying problems is also, there are things like simple things like with the Orinoco Valley, for example. There have been environmental problems, and also there've been resistance there because of possible environmental consequences from drilling in the area. There's also this sense of that there's a decaying infrastructure and that would need to be brought up to speed, and before even be able to exploit even the existing oil reserves, and then potentially explore for more oil. And it seems like there's the majors are just waiting for this kind of to go away, because I mean there are other possibilities, and there are other also places around the world where oil could be more easily accessible without the political risk, and without seeing exactly how obviously the Rodriguez government wants to attract investment, but she's an interim president, and also we don't know what the political situation is. There's, like we mentioned earlier, there hasn't been a big change. So essentially, of course, the markets are welcoming the fact that Maduro is no longer there. But in terms of like in-depth structure, that's one of the key problems. The other thing is also you would need the investment. So who is going to come up with that amount of money? And there is also there is an easing of sanctions, obviously, but still they're still there. There have to be exceptions. So.
Yeah, as you say, even if we assume that legal conditions, political conditions dramatically improve, you've still got as you described it, the decaying infrastructure. And what about the quality of Venezuelan crude itself? Of course, every nation that exports oil will say, our oil's the best. But is there a quality issue as well to deal with?
Well, it is. I mean, it's nothing wrong with it, but it's just the type of oil is heavy oil. So around the world, there are fewer refineries, and they're not readily available to be able to accommodate that kind of oil. And in terms of oil products and refining, it's a lot more difficult to proceed with heavy oil versus the oil that we have in the Gulf. And there is a possibility for increasing of oil production. We've seen that OPEC and OPEC Plus, they have the possibility to increase production. So the issue is not that there's no oil available; it's that they're also trying to control this. Of course, Trump, before he has kind of promised low oil prices before the midterm elections in the U.S., and that's kind of also a domestic issue for him. So obviously, they want to proceed with accommodate the Venezuelan oil. As I said, it's also equally a market as much as a political decision at this point.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And Mark, you spoke about the initial positive reaction from markets. Nevertheless, there's a lot to be considered, isn't there, at the moment? There's obviously Venezuela, there's also Iran happening.
Yeah.
Do you think this is, would we be naive to describe this as the market's just brushing this off? Under the surface, are there deeper concerns that we need to worry about?
Yeah, I think they have kind of factored it in, the same thing as they have done with Iran. We see that now even with the current military build-up around Iran and the possibility, the market also is not reacting for, obviously if they close the Straits of Hormuz or anything radical like that would have a huge impact on the market. But we've seen that right now, unless there is some really big change, the market has factored this in. And don't forget that also there is a kind of lag in the world economy. We're not actually, we've seen that China is not doing as anticipated, and the demand of oil, there might be a lag in 2026. So the oil prices could be somewhere between $60 and $80 per barrel, but I don't see like a big slump or a major decline. A major decline or a spike in this year.
And finally, Kostas, just be interested to get your perspective on the sort of bigger picture. We've seen a huge shift in terms of the way that energy policy is formulated and communicated over the last 5 years. Do you think that this sense in which energy policy is now becoming much more political than purely economic, that might start to really cause problems for price stability, particularly in the context of these difficult situations in Venezuela and Iran?
Yeah, we've seen also, I know we're talking about oil mostly, but we've seen also the spike in gas prices, natural gas recently. So obviously, those decisions affect, the decision, for example, to limit, the European Union has decided to reduce completely its reliance on Russian gas and oil. So we've seen that also having an impact on the gas market and on oil prices as well. You're based in, you're in Baku. I actually might be Baku in March, with the South Gas Corridor Ministerial Council. So, and next week I'm going to Bucharest, where we have the Black Sea Energy Week. And there, it's going to ask a lot about oil projects in the Black Sea, but also the possibility for renewables. So, and also, the fact that, there's a switch to increase renewables, this also affects the market in a good way, actually. This is the natural trend. This is the natural trend to have renewables also coming to the market.
Mr. Europoulos, we look forward to welcoming you to Baku in March, and we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
After the break, we check in with our correspondents all around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
It's too risky to stop and film outside, so we stay inside the vehicle.
We're dealing with an individual and with a regime that will not be satisfied with the mere reimposition of its authority.
Notre position est claire. Monsieur Kadhafi doit partir.
It is time for Gaddafi to go.
اليوم ليس هذه الأماني والطموح اللي كنا نحلم بها في 2011. دولة ملكنة في بعض المشاكل الميليشيات هذه صايرة في برنامج البلاد في ليبيا معناها.
الحصول على هذا المستوى ليس بالأمر السهل في دولة تشهد عدم استقرار سياسي من حوالي أكثر من 14 سنة.
لو ما تدخلش الجانب التركي وحاول انه هو يهدي الوضع، اليوم احنا تحولت هذه الحرب لحرب اهليه.
We're having the infrastructure to produce 11 BCM cubic meter of gas per year.
هو إشارة قوية بأن ليبيا وصلت إلى مستوى من الاستقرار لا يمكن أن تعود به إلى الخلف.
Welcome back. You're watching PrimeTime. Now, let's head across the globe to our correspondents for news in their countries. The US Vice President is set to visit Armenia and Azerbaijan in February as Washington looks to advance its peace roadmap for the South Caucasus. Now, Georgia, once a close US partner in the region, is notably absent from the itinerary, prompting questions about its standing. A-News's Nini Nikolashvili reports.
The visit of the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance to Armenia and Azerbaijan in February is officially aimed at advancing the Trump roadmap for international peace and prosperity, or TRIP. with a focus on stabilizing Armenian-Azerbaijan relations and the Zangezur corridor. Georgia, once Washington's closest strategic partner in the South Caucasus, was not included. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze says that the visit is narrowly focused and that Georgia's absence is logical. According to him, the talks center on the Armenian-Azerbaijani peace process and the Zangezur corridor, making Yerevan and Baku the primary addresses. But beyond logistics, the exclusion highlights a broader shift. For years, Georgia positioned itself as the region's most pro-Western state and a key transit hub linking Europe and Asia. Today, as global trade routes are being reassessed and competition over corridors intensifies, Georgia finds itself watching from the sidelines. Georgian Dream lawmakers argue that this is temporary. They say the Zangezur corridor cannot handle projected cargo volumes and that Georgia will remain indispensable as a transport and logistics hub. Officials insist Washington will eventually factor Georgia into its regional planning. Still, the political context matters. Relations between Tbilisi and Washington deteriorated sharply under the Biden administration amid criticism over democratic backsliding and controversial legislation. The current government says that it is waiting for a reset under President Donald Trump, but acknowledges that trust has not yet been restored. That same tension is visible in Washington. Days before the announced visit, the U.S. Helsinki Commission scheduled a hearing sharply critical of Georgia's human rights record, a move that Tbilisi views as politically motivated and damaging at a time when it is seeking to reset relations with the United States. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Turkey is continuing its diplomatic efforts to help bring an end to the conflict in Gaza. Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has met senior Hamas officials in Istanbul as Ankara pushes for a sustained ceasefire and expanded humanitarian access. A News' Adam Morrow picks up the story.
Turkey's Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan met with a Hamas delegation on Monday in Istanbul, according to sources from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. The talks focused on the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire plan, the worsening humanitarian situation in the enclave, and broader regional developments. Foreign Minister Fidan reportedly briefed the delegation on Turkey's diplomatic efforts, including its role in the newly formed Board of Peace, a multilateral platform purportedly aimed at ensuring the rights of Palestinians in Gaza. At the meeting, Fidan reportedly stressed that Ankara remains committed to ensuring a steady flow of humanitarian aid into the war-torn region. The current ceasefire agreement, which took effect last October, calls for Hamas and other Palestinian groups to disarm, an additional Israeli withdrawal, and the commencement of large-scale reconstruction efforts. The Board of Peace was announced earlier this month by U.S. President Donald Trump and has been endorsed by the UN Security Council. On Sunday, the Hamas delegation also held talks with Turkish intelligence chief Ibrahim Kalin in Istanbul. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
A report by the New York Times says talks between the United States and the Taliban over American detainees have stalled despite authorities in Kabul saying they are ready to release US prisoners. A News' Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
For months, US and Afghan officials have been holding secret negotiations aimed at securing the release of remaining American detainees in Afghanistan, a key priority for President Trump and a condition for any further diplomatic engagement with the Taliban. However, according to the New York Times, the talks have stalled due to disagreements over who should be freed. Taliban officials say they are prepared to release 2 American detainees, but are demanding that the case of the last Afghan prisoner held at Guantanamo Bay be addressed as part of any deal. That prisoner, Mohammad Rahim, is accused of links to Al-Qaeda and has been held at Guantanamo since 2008 without formal charges. The United States, meanwhile, is insisting that at least 3 Americans should be released, including Mahmoud Habibi, whom Washington say was detained in Afghanistan in 2022. Kabul denies holding Habibi for leverage, while Afghanistan's foreign minister has told the New York Times that Kabul is not engaging in hostage diplomacy and is seeking broader progress in relations with Washington. The U.S. State Department rejects that position and is calling for the immediate release of all Americans detained in Afghanistan. The report adds that recent security incidents and political tensions have further complicated negotiations, leaving the fate of the remaining detainees uncertain. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Nearly 5 decades of comprehensive US sanctions have imposed severe economic challenges to Iran's major industries and its citizens, driving up the costs of production and living across the country.
U.S. sanctions have intensified under Washington's so-called maximum pressure campaign, targeting Iran's foreign trade, particularly petrochemical exports. The effort began during Donald Trump's first term and has accelerated since his return to office last year.
Of course, I am more interested in calling what is happening unilateral coercive measures, of which sanctions are one of its branches. In relation to many countries, they are actually using other models, such as the tariff war.
The sanctions now hit Iran's energy, shipping, and financial sectors, with negative effects across society. Protests to rising prices and currency decline last December ignited unrest, which led to death and wounding of thousands of people. Inflation above 50% and a steep currency decline of 90% have pushed up prices and weakened purchasing power. On the factory floor, the United States maximum pressure is tangible. Manufacturers describe facing a constant battle against isolation and rising costs.
The US sanctions, which started a few years ago and have now intensified, have caused us to face many problems in the field of technology transfer and trade with foreign and international companies. These sanctions have severely affected Iran's industries, driving up production costs and leading to higher overall prices.
U.S. sanctions on Iran date back to the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Nearly 5 decades later, those sanctions remain in force. What began with frozen Iranian assets in U.S. banks has since expanded, tied to disputes over Tehran's regional policy, nuclear program, and ballistic missile development. United States is demanding a zero enrichment policy and limiting the range of Iran's missiles to about 500 kilometers. With Iran declaring U.S. conditions as it redlines, there are no promising prospects on easing of U.S. sanctions, let alone removing them in a predictable future. Turad Shiralilu, Tehran, for A News.
The future of the Northern Aral Sea is back on the agenda in Kazakhstan. In Astana, officials from the Kazakh government and the World Bank have discussed how joint projects aimed at restoring the sea will move forward as the region continues to face the long-term consequences of one of Central Asia's most severe environmental crises.
Kazakhstan's Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation Nurjan Nurjigitov met with the World Bank's permanent representative in Kazakhstan, Andrei Mikhnov, to discuss the implementation of joint restoration projects. The focus was on the Northern Aral Sea Preservation Project. It includes the reconstruction of the Kokoral Dam, which is expected to help raise water levels. Project documentation is now close to completion. For Kazakhstan, the Northern Aral is no longer just an environmental issue. It affects people's livelihoods, employment in the region, agricultural sustainability, and the overall state of local ecosystems. In this context, the World Bank's involvement is seen as a logical continuation of ongoing efforts. The first phase of the project has already delivered tangible results.
According to the Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, water levels in the northern Aral Sea have increased by 42%, while annual fish catches have reached 8,000 tons. The next goal is set for the coming 5 years. Kazakhstan, together with Uzbekistan, plans to increase the volume of water in the northern Aral Sea to 34 cubic kilometers. Authorities say the two sides have agreed on a stable inflow of water, including during low water periods. And despite these efforts, the drying up of the Aral Sea remains the largest environmental disaster in Central Asia. Since the 1960s, its surface area has shrunk almost ninefold, water levels have fallen threefold, and water volume has decreased by about 15 times. Each year, around 100 million tons of salty dust rise from the dried seabed and spread across the region. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Hong Kong has intensified health screening at its airport following reports of Nipah virus cases in India. Now, authorities say enhanced checks are in place for incoming passengers as a precaution, while stressing there are no new local cases and the overall risk remains low. Our correspondent Manor Makdoum has more.
Hong Kong is tightening health surveillance at its airports after reports of a cluster of Nipah virus infections in India, as authorities move to prevent any potential importation of the disease. The Centre for Health Protection said it's closely monitoring the situation and has enhanced screening measures for inbound travelers, especially those arriving from affected areas, as a precautionary public health step. Under the heightened measures, airport staff are carrying out temperature checks, health assessments, and on-site medical evaluations for passengers displaying symptoms consistent with infection. Suspected cases would be immediately referred to public hospitals for isolation and further investigation. The CSP said it's maintaining close communication with the World Health Organization and Indian health authorities to track developments and update its risk assessment. Nipah virus is a zoonotic disease carried mainly by fruit bats and can spread to humans through direct contact with infected animals, contaminated food, or in some cases, person-to-person transmission. The virus can cause severe respiratory illness and fatal brain inflammation, and there is currently no approved vaccine or specific treatment. Hong Kong health officials said no local or imported cases have been detected so far, and the overall risk remains low, but urged the public to stay vigilant and seek medical attention if symptoms develop after travel to affected regions. Manu Mathing, A News, Beijing.
Britain is testing a new balance in its foreign policy as Prime Minister Keir Starmer prepares for talks in China against the backdrop of worsening US-China relations. Our correspondent has more now from Manchester.
UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is set to travel to China this week in a high-stakes visit aimed at sowing relations with Beijing and boosting Britain's economy at a time of strained ties with the United States. It will be the first visit by a UK leader to China since 2018. The trip comes as China moves ahead with plans for a new expanded embassy in London, a project that has sparked political and security concerns in the UK. Starmer's 4-day visit begins on Wednesday, during which he is due to meet Chinese President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Jian, and the country's top legislator Zhou Leji. The Prime Minister will be accompanied by Business Secretary Peter Kyle and a delegation of more than 50 British companies and institutions from sectors including finance, healthcare, and manufacturing. Downing Street hopes the visit will unlock new Chinese investment and widen access to the world's second-largest economy for UK industries such as financial services, car manufacturing, and Scotch whisky. China's Commerce Ministry says trade and investment documents are expected to be signed during the visit, adding Beijing is willing to strengthen communication to create what it called a fair, transparent, and rules-based business environment. China's foreign ministry has also struck a welcoming tone, saying Beijing is ready to enhance mutual trust and deepen practical cooperation with Britain, a member of the Group of Seven. But the trip carries political risks. Starmer faces pressure from China hawks at home.
who want closer ties could undermine national security and values. There is also the risk of tension with Washington. US President Donald Trump has been ramping up tariffs and criticism of America's closest allies, and any UK move to deepen economic engagement with China could prompt a sharp response. Analysts say Starmer is walking a diplomatic tightrope. China is no longer just a rolls factory, but an increasingly important consumer market, one Britain cannot easily ignore as it searches for growth. For Starmer, the visit is a test of economic pragmatism and of how far Britain can rebalance its China policy without straining relations with its closest security ally. Dina Farizadeh, A-News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Okay, let's take a look at some more top stories at home and from around the world. Azerbaijan is taking concrete steps to ensure high-quality internet across its hotels and tourism venues, setting new standards for connectivity in the region. Well, officials say the initiative, supported by regular audits and certification, will strengthen the country's appeal to both business and leisure travellers while boosting confidence in its digital infrastructure. A-News' Aysel Ibrahimova has more.
Today is about how Azerbaijan welcomes the world, connected and future-ready. This moment sets a new standard for digital experience in hospitality, making every stay smoother, faster, and truly world-class for its guests.
High-speed internet is now shaping Azerbaijan's ambition to become a trusted global tourism and events destination, as officials and industry leaders move to certify and upgrade connectivity in hotels and venues. The issue was discussed at the Strategic Executive Summit in Baku, hosted by Ookla together with the Information Communication Technologies Agency, the Azerbaijan Tourism Board, and the Azerbaijan Hotel Association. Organizers say the initiative is important, as fast, secure connectivity has become a key factor in choosing hotels, planning trips, and event tourism. According to the data shared at the event, across the wider Middle East, many luxury hotels still fall below guest expectations for Wi-Fi speed and security. By contrast, Azerbaijan's rapid fiber rollout, which expanded access from around 9% to nearly full coverage in 5 years under the Online Azerbaijan project, lays a strong foundation for high-quality digital services and connectivity.
If you look at the performance in the country, it has definitely increased dramatically over the last 5 years with the initiative of Azerbaijan Online. And so while the fiber connectivity is great and the speeds are very, very strong in the country, often a customer's experience is limited by the Wi-Fi. And I think there's definitely an opportunity to improve the performance that customers get with enhancements that can be made to the Wi-Fi within the building and within hotels.
With this step, Azerbaijan becomes the first country to pilot a new speed test certified approach, designed to deliver a world-class digital experience while generating clear economic and strategic benefits.
In line with the outcomes of this event, over the coming years, we will sign and implement a concrete action plan in cooperation with both government bodies and international organizations to improve the quality of internet services in accommodation facilities across Azerbaijan. The country has recently hosted a number of major international events, and visitors place great importance on the quality of internet services. We will continue to work with the industry from a digitalization perspective to establish Azerbaijan as a trusted destination for event tourism in the future.
The first steps will naturally involve establishing a clear standard. This standard is expected to be developed jointly by both our side and the hotels, creating a common benchmark. Following this, the standard will be implemented and audited in the tourism sector by Ookla. Once the audit is completed, hotels or other venues that meet the criteria will be able to receive the certification, and periodic audits will follow to ensure that the certification is maintained over time.
Participants concluded that improving in-building Wi-Fi and introducing certification with regular audits will strengthen tourist confidence, support business travel, and help position Azerbaijan as a dependable host for international conferences, global events, and long-stay visitors, ultimately contributing to economic growth.
Israel said on Monday that it has recovered the body of the last hostage held in Gaza, a step that could pave the way for a US-backed plan to rebuild and demilitarize the territory.
Israel says the body of the last slain Israeli hostage, Ran Gvili, has been recovered from Gaza by the Israeli army. On Monday, the remains of the police officer and Special Forces veteran were formally identified, ending the search for the final hostage held since the Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7, 2023. The Israeli military began searching a cemetery in Gaza on Sunday after Hamas's armed wing said it had shared details of Gvili's location with mediators. His return fulfills a key requirement of the first phase of US President Donald Trump's peace plan. Gvili had been held for more than 840 days. Israeli officials say the recovery brings long-awaited closure to his family and marks the end of Israel's hostage ordeal. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the operation an extraordinary achievement, praising Israeli forces and crediting President Trump with helping secure the release of 20 living hostages earlier under the ceasefire agreement. Speaking in Jerusalem, Netanyahu described Gvili as a hero who continued fighting despite severe injuries before being killed.
But then we had to get another 28 deceased hostages. And we got them all out, and there remained one, Rani Gvili. Rani Gvili, from the special unit in the police, who fought not only with a broken arm. He was shot twice, and he kept fighting. And he killed 14 terrorists alone. And then he died. And we said we'd bring him back. He was the first to come in. He's the last to leave, a hero of Israel. Rani is back. There are no more hostages in Gaza. Tremendous achievement for our heroic forces, our soldiers, our commanders. None like them.
In Tel Aviv, crowds gathered at what has become known as Hostages Square, expressing a mix of sorrow, relief, and cautious hope.
One thing I know, peace. Peace. And that's what we should do. I don't know how, I don't know the way. It's the most complicated thing ever, but there's no way to proceed otherwise. We need a solution, and it must be something solid and sustainable, and if we won't believe it, it will never happen.
Israeli officials say the return of hostages' body could allow the limited reopening of Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt. A US-backed committee says the crossing may open this week, though Israel has not confirmed a timeline. The next phase of the plan would focus on rebuilding and fully demilitarizing Gaza, including disarming Hamas, deploying an international stabilization force, and gradually withdrawing Israeli troops. Under President Trump's proposal, Hamas fighters who give up their weapons and commit to peace could receive amnesty, while others would be offered safe passage out of Gaza.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us again tomorrow evening for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.